Okay, for the overarching theme is language, refugee children, and religion. And the first question is, how do the articles define Islamophobia?
So the article that I read, it just said having an irrational fear of or prejudice towards Muslim people or people who may appear to be Muslim. And that was the basic definition they gave.
I also found it interesting. There was a section in the Rama Rajan and Rennell article about how the media portrays Islam, the religion, and it talked about how in Aladdin, the people with the accents are kind of the bad people and they're dark, and so they portray them as bad. So the media also plays a role in Islamophobia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's really subtle things that present that. I think one of the articles referred to as a microaggression that's a little more than a microaggression, but just little subtle things that kind of start to build in your psyche, especially as kids, you know.
Yeah, it's just like taking that falsified stereotype and then generalizing it to a larger group of people. Is what I took out of the articles.
And I think it's definitely not just in schools. It's not just with kids. Like we do it all the time. I was just talking to somebody about the airport and how she always gets stopped. She's from Pakistan, and you know, it's I think everywhere. So it trickles down to the kids really easily.
Yeah, I just was talking to somebody about that like tonight at my bowling league. I was like, yeah, tonight I'm doing a webinar, and like I think the theme is like Islamophobia, and she was like, oh, I definitely have that. Like she was really honest about it. Like whenever I get to an airport and if I see someone that looks like that, like I definitely start getting nervous. So I think it's very common.
Or even like when you see them with the burqas and where they wear the hats and you start to question, like what you said at the airport, especially. Yeah.
I think just as Americans in general, just you know, September 11 is ingrained so heavily in our minds. Right,
but and the sad part is that our kids now, especially the grade that a lot of us teach, they weren't alive when that happened. So they don't even know what 9/11, they hear it in their history textbooks, but they don't even know what it is, how we actually saw the airplane go into the building. They have no thing to correlate that with. It's just what they hear, what their parents tell them.
Yeah. I don't even think they get it in history though, because I had to sit down and explain to them what even happened on 9/11 because they didn't even understand why we were having a moment of silence at school on that day. So I had to like actually explain it to them. Wow. So I don't know how much it's actually taught if they even get to that point in history in their history.
I think it gets cut off a lot because it's so recent.
So too. Right.
And something that like really spoke to me from one of the articles was about, I even wrote it down like a responsible person, was just about like the context in which we teach it is can feed off that. And it was kind of a slap in my face because, you know, when I teach geography or something like that, we get to the Middle East and the major topic is terrorism. And so I teach Islam kind of with that. And then it kind of slapped me in the face, like my intentions are good, and I'm trying to educate and let them understand what it is, but when I'm teaching it in that context, that's really just kind of feeding the fire. And I like some of the suggestions that it gave for, you know, how to introduce all kinds of different cultures with like food and poetry and things like that. And I was like, that's something that I'm definitely going to incorporate into future plans that I have.
Okay. The second question is, are Arab American parents involved in their children's education?
Yeah, and I just was reading and it just said the Arab American parents tend to be actively involved with their children's learning within the home environment. And so I think I took that as teachers, we just need to be cognizant of that and understand that that's where they are active in their child's schooling. And so that was one thing. I know I taught a student who was Russian, and it was similar that she's very active at home, but not as active in school. And a lot of people stereotyped her and judged her as being a bad parent, as somebody who didn't care. And that wasn't it at all. It was just that's how she educated her kid was at home. Her place was at home to do that. And so I think as educators, we just need to be aware of that cultural difference. I thought it was great that the article brought that up.
Yeah. I agree.
It also said that the mother is usually more involved than the father because they take on that. The mother's role is in caring for the children and their education.
What I thought was really interesting was that article about Arab American children with disabilities, how it talked about, family honor is a big part of Arabic culture, and they're not always direct in saying this is what we need, and so especially if they are recent immigrants and if they don't know the special ed law, they don't know it's available, and it's an obstacle that we have to be aware of in order to help them help their kids.
Well, especially because it was mentioning you really have to think about with disabilities and how disabilities are viewed in their culture. And so I think that article just displayed it beautifully about how you can approach them and different ways to talk about it, whereas you're not offensive. I thought it was good.
Kind of a sidebar. I don't know if this is just the geography history teacher in me, but I had two things about that article just kind of really stood out to me. One was that, if I understood it correctly, like the federal census counts Arab Americans as white.
Oh yeah,
too.
And
that was interesting.
But also, in the Middle East, they're one of the more dominant ethnic groups. You still have Persians, you still have Kurdish, you still have all non-Arabs, but still followers of Islam. I don't know, maybe it was just a verbiage thing, but they just kind of.
No, I don't think it was verbiage, because we had an article in the last module when it was talking about Latina or Hispanic immigrants, where they were saying that they were considered to be white in the earlier years, and now they're considered to be multicultural or ethnic or brown.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but I remember reading that.
I remember reading something like that too.
And something in the what's it called? The podcast that we listened to for the case study, and it said we need to understand exactly where they're from. And there was something about how teachers were talking about all of their Mexican students, and the ELL teacher was like, no, they're from El Salvador, they're from Honduras, they're not from Mexico. So learning exactly what part they're from, just taking that time, the way they perfected it was come on, just take the time to actually figure out where
their background. Yeah.
Okay. The next question is, in what ways do refugee children experience schooling? And I put some refugee children experience schooling negatively by perceptions or racism or the lack of support from the teachers and or administration.
Yeah, and I also read in an article that they also may not have experience in formal schooling altogether because of their status of refugee. They might have they didn't have the ability to go to school with whatever issues they had going on where they came from. So that's a significant issue. And I also noticed that with some of my students that aren't, don't speak English, that I don't think they're not refugee, but they came to the country, but they are put like into my biology class, but they have never been in school. So they only know how to speak their language, don't even know how to write it or read it. So that makes it even more difficult at a high school level.
Yeah, I think that Ruja and Roxas article was saying that they encounter an additional level of marginalization by being less visible, even within the immigrant education studies. And it's hard because they're the students that are forced to leave their country because of violence or death. And so they have a lot of that PTSD. And like you said, Caitlin, not a lot of them have been to school before. And so it's a completely different setting for them. I think that's a whole new layer.
And going along with the PTSD thing, if you're looking at like the Maslow's hierarchy, I think it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you have to feel safe. Like they're never gonna be able to truly learn because they're just so bogged down with the stress and the anxiety that they're facing. So they're really fighting an uphill battle everywhere, like out of school, but in school too.
And especially my previous school, like we had about half of our students were Hispanic, and I know I taught at least two who had extremely limited English speaking skills, or at least they pretended like they did. But the benefit was there were so many Spanish speakers that we could translate. And I speak Spanish okay, but I couldn't imagine being, I don't know, say Russian. I leave Russia, I come here, and nobody else speaks my language. Nobody else can relate to me on a cultural level anyway. That would be terrifying.
Yep.
Yeah. Next question is, what is ethnic studies and how can it be used in racially diverse and predominantly white schools?
So I read the Rios article, which is pretty much all about ethnic studies. And pretty much it's just a combination of, you hear about like African-American studies, Hispanic studies. It's pretty much all of those together, but it's supposed to be about specific to the students' communities and their schools. So they gave some really cool examples of like case studies of what it meant rather than just trying to define it. They talked about schools looking at laws in their area and like how they're affecting certain groups. They talked about students creating a community treasures project, finding like gems from the different ethnicities and demographics in their community. And then the last one was an action research project students took to like to find incidences of racial injustice in their community and like work to fix it. So it's just about, it's not just a token like, let's have a month where we read a book by this author and check off a box. It was supposed to be very like action oriented and learning about their own environments.
I don't know if you guys know, like the video from the case study that we had to watch. I did a paper on that in undergrad, and do any of you know the background of what happened in that?
In Arizona?
Yeah, in Arizona.
Yeah, when I heard it was banned, I was so confused.
So it was a school that was primarily Latino, African American, and I think even some Native American. And the teachers there, they wanted to make it very, it was an extremely low performing school, so they just flipped the curriculum to make it more relevant to them. And so they really just were empowering the kids to understand history from the perspective of their ancestors, and they were following all of the steps. They met with their local representatives, they met with the school board, and everybody shut them down. They the news was blasting them as un-American and trying to start riots and just completely missing the point of what they were doing. And they even had a sit-in, and the city arrested all of the students and the teachers and anybody else who was there.
How did I not know about this?
It was the most ridiculous thing. It blew my mind. It absolutely blew my mind, because that didn't happen. I mean, that's happened in the past 10 years, maybe.
That's crazy.
That's crazy. Yeah, I was so confused when I heard that ethnic studies were banned, and I was like, why when there's so much evidence about how empowering and transformative it is, why would it be banned?
Yeah, I mean, the speaker, Ron, I think his name is Ron Espirito.
Espirito,
How
yeah.
liberating it was to study it and how to go through the steps of decolonialization and making sure it's culturally relevant and community responsive, and really banding that local community together. How how empowering it is. I think it's crazy that there are places that banned it, but it's good. I think it's good to get the word out there, and to, like you said, it has to be locally developed. It can't be something that we nationally develop. Within each community, you need to adapt.
Yeah, I agree with that, in that sense that in Hawaii, from K through 12, I want to say they still have Hawaiian studies. So they're learning the language, they're learning the culture, they're learning all of that along with their normal coursework. But not only that, they also have a program for teachers that go through kind of like the local things that are done here in Hawaii to get them kind of indoctrinated into the culture, I guess, and make teachers more aware, make students more aware. And I think that's so much more powerful than just trying to eradicate that, in a sense. So I think, especially with the Native American population and with the populations that have low representation, you have to have that kind of curriculum where it empowers them to want to learn and use their culture to want to learn in that way.
I'd just like to throw in that growing up, I went to a school where it was predominantly Native American. And in high school, it was predominantly Native American. But I didn't start learning about my own culture until I went to a HBCU my first years of college. And everyone at that school in the African American literature class and a few other classes that was derived, I was lost. And there were other cultures in the class. There were some Asian American students and white students and myself. And well, some of them knew more about my culture than I did. And it was embarrassing. And I had to work overtime my first 2 years of college to find out my background and histories so that I could participate in class in the discussions. So, yeah.
What state did you grow up in?
North Carolina, in the Fayetteville, Fort Bragg area, but it's about 30 or 40 minutes south of Fayetteville. Very rural.
I mean, I know in my college, I didn't take an ethnic studies class. I was not required to take one. I took one as an elective my last semester because I was just looking for an easy 2-credit course class. And I just, thinking about that, it's like, why was it not required of me? And I was looking at something that was like easy, and it definitely was not easy. It was really challenging, but I definitely learned a lot through that class too. So.
Okay. What are ways that teachers can engage in discussions in Islamophobia? So I said that teachers can engage in discussions in Islamophobia by integrating initial discussions about religion and culture to children in elementary grades to expand their worldviews. That's probably a direct quote.
Yeah.
Well, I think teaching a lot about the culture, not just the negatives and not just the stereotypes, but teaching all about the culture and the people and getting kids really immersed in it rather than just doing a singular unit on terrorism, which I know isn't what teachers do anyway. But I think that's something that the readings we're talking about, and actually I know at my school they try and do that. So it was interesting for me to hear that there are teachers that just talk about terrorism and that's it with that culture, because that's not even what terrorism is. So I thought that was interesting. My reading.
I also liked how it pointed out, like, because I'm a kindergarten teacher, I'm going to be with the little babies, and they talked about how children's literature is really a concrete way to communicate with young kids. Because I think about like how much I water down everything for them just because I want to make sure my instruction is developmentally appropriate. Like, and so I just liked the idea of incorporating more children's literature, because I mean we do read aloud all the time.
I have a lot of great bilingual Spanish-English books. If you're interested, I can share those with you. That's just, I mean, they're just stories and in both languages, and even my middle school students, I do stuff like that with them.
That's awesome.
With you later.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, I think that that's a great way for honestly all ages, because children's books, like, they're just low stress, you know, for a topic that's so scary for kids to talk about, and it could be kind of cute's not the right word, but just like a low risk way to introduce a problem, or rather than just like finding some article about somebody being discriminated against, which is also great, but it might hit too close to home for certain kids. So.
Did you guys see there was something about the Disney movie Aladdin?
Yeah.
Saying how there were stereotypes in the movie Aladdin. I didn't realize that until I saw that. I was like, oh my goodness. But that's not the first time I had heard about Disney movies being, you know, stereotyping culture.
They're bad. They're really bad.
Yeah.
Future considerations for teachers who are unsure of how to address religious and language discrimination in school.
I think the biggest thing I got was just teachers modeling, expressing their experiences through storytelling of their cultural identity in their own words, and then having students create art or create narratives. And this was in the Prusa Roxas article, and this was specific to refugee students, but I feel like it can kind of apply to anybody, just giving kids a chance to understand who they are and express themselves in whatever way they feel comfortable. So letting them make a piece of artwork or write a poem or whatever they feel is important to them, I think is a good way to start. And I think you guys were mentioning, making sure it's not just one unit. I don't remember who said that, but making sure it's throughout the class and it's not just, okay, here's the 1 week-long assignment we're going to do, but really make your class completely surrounded in it.
And I think you can talk to the kids too. I mean, kids want to talk about this stuff. Like, our kids today are so much more into social justice, or like we had that nationwide walkout or whatever, you know, when the school shooting happened and stuff like that. They want to be a part of this. So I think just kind of talking to them about what are things that they see? What are, you know, what cultures do they want to know more? I don't know, just like get input from them and then build ideas from there. And they'll be a lot more motivated because they got to put some say in it too. So
I agree with that. But then at the same time, it's, you know, going back to one of the articles where it talks about the politics in education, everything unfortunately within education starts at the top. And our political system is so white and male dominated that I see nothing truly happening in education with policies, curriculum, and procedures until our politics change and our politics become more diverse, that then can start to roll the ball into changing these types of discussions within and moving the needle towards a more inclusive education than white education, which is unfortunate because if the kids want it and the kids see a need for it, but the adults don't see that the kids are smart enough to change.
Yeah.
I was looking through my 7th grade world history standards and thinking about, you know, all of this that we've been talking about, and I look at the standards and I'm like, oh my gosh, they are so narrow and just makes me cringe. But because, you know, I teach at a school, it's super small, it's a super rural, super redneck little town in the mountains, and it's all white. I've never taught in an all white school before, but it's hard to teach diversity. It's more of this thing that's out there in the world. So one thing that I like to try to do, I think it's important for my kids to get, you know, understand who they are and what their culture and their values are. And then, you know, we can look, as we look and explore other cultures, as we bring people in who can talk to us and share their experiences with us, and we start to realize we're not that different. We respect our parents. We value these morals and these behaviors, and we look different, but being able to, especially for middle schoolers, being able to have some concrete thing that says, these are things that I value, and then kind of aligning that, I think that really shows or gives them opportunities to empathize and to understand other cultures, and in that way that combats that Islamophobia. And sometimes I like to just say, you know, let's play Mythbusters. And one of the first things I do is I say, okay, what does it mean to be Southern? And that one's always a fun topic of discussion. And we unpack that and we talk about the positives and negatives, and then we just kind of say, okay, now let's look at another culture and analyze those stereotypes, and those always end up being fun discussions, and I learn just as much as they do.
Awesome that you're like a history teacher, so you're right there in it. Oh.
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time?
I was just saying it's good that you're, you know, so involved in this, because I feel like you have that space in your curriculum. Like with social studies, you can intertwine this like so easily, so kids really get a good exposure
sometimes.
Well, I'd like to add, as far as the school that I teach at, is a Title I school. Most of the population is either African American or I pause to say Hispanic, but Latino. And with the Common Core state standards and our lesson planning, everything is timed down to the minutes in my class. And so I struggle with finding or figuring out exactly where can I implement some of these suggestions in these articles, because my time is limited in my class. They all but tell me what to teach, you know, as far as the text or I don't know, but mostly everything is already set. Like we're taking this week, we're gonna go over reading literature 6.2, and that's what all of the English teachers have to teach. And then, you know, as far as the lesson plan is set out with, you know, the Common Core state standards, your objective, your hook for the class, your essential question, guided practice, instructional, what do you call it? Independent practice, and exit ticket and homework and your accommodations, and that's it every day. It doesn't really leave that much time for us to say, oh, okay, I would like to talk about something else today.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think about in science is it's not quite as easy to just pull it in. I try to emphasize when discoveries are made by people that are maybe less obvious. But yeah, I just feel like there's no time, and I try to build it in when I can, but it's hard with everything else we're required to do.
Okay, well, if nobody has anything else to say, that is our 30 minutes for tonight.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you, guys. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Bye.